Good morning. Welcome to Mission Peak Unitarian Universalist Congregation. My name is Deanna Alm, and I'm the president of the board. Unitarian Universalism is a radically inclusive, non-doctrinal, non-dogmatic, open-hearted, and open-minded faith. We are people who are reaching across a diversity of experiences and perspectives to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. From our Unitarian side, we are called to apply reason and tolerance to religion instead of guilt and shame. And from our Universalist side, we are called to love the hell out of the world. We strive to be the change we want to see. Our membership folks are placing a link in our weekly newsletter in the chat so that you can see all the events coming up, as well as our welcome@mpuuc.org email address, which you can use to request a newsletter or other information. We have a uniquely special service this morning, as is evidenced by this welcome coming right up front. First of all, let me remind you that we have a book by the back door of Cole Hall if you're here in person, or we use Zoom chat to share our joys and concerns if you're joining us online. In both cases, we ask you to write your name, write whether it is a joy or a concern, and be a little brief. Because the format of today's service is different than usual, please begin posting your joys and concerns in the chat now. During this past month, Kathy Bain and our Arrow team reached out to some prominent denominational leaders to help us understand a little more about the Eighth Principle Project. The Eighth Principle is a call to expand and inform our existing 7 principles to explicitly address anti-racism and anti-oppression. Kathy and the rest of the Arrow team were able to arrange with both of the co-authors of the project to come speak with us. Today, we'll hear from Bruce Pollack-Johnson. On January 23rd, we'll hear from Paula Cole-Jones. This was such a coup to get both of these leaders to come. In fact, Reverend Greg noticed that other congregations and colleagues were a little bit envious. So he began figuring out how this could be a shared service. We have 5 congregations who have collaborated to help put together today's service, and the rest of those congregations will be joining us at 10:30. To accommodate some of our unique and personal aspects of our Mission Peak service, we're front-loading joys and concerns. We'll have a short musical piece to invite people in Cole Hall to put a stone in our stone garden down here in front, and for people online to put their joys and concerns in the chat. But quickly, here's a few announcements for you. We're reminding everyone that except for our speakers, everyone should be masked inside and outside Cole Hall. Please silence your electronic devices. And at the end of the service today, we hope to have a few minutes to ask questions of our speaker. At that point, if you have a question, we ask you to put it in the chat, prefacing it with MPUUC so we know which congregation is asking. If you're here in person, you'll be able to give your question to Graham Bell or to David, and then they can type it in the chat for you. If you hear or see something in this morning's very special service that inspires you or makes you laugh or brings you hope, please tweet it or share it on social media or just tell a friend. We're trying to start a wave of love and justice with every gathering. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, while we listen to Peak Rocks play our song of reflection, please enter your joys and concerns in the chat. If you're here with us in person and would like to place a commemorative stone in our stone garden, please come up the sides of the sanctuary and exit down the middle aisle.
I was born by the river in a little tent, just like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Ah, yes, it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gon' come. Ah, yes it will. I go to the movie and I go downtown. Somebody keep telling me don't hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. And I go to my brother. I say, brother, help me please. But it winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Whoa, there's been times that I thought I couldn't last for long, but now I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gon' come. Oh, yes it will.
Okay. And finally, one last stone for the hopes and hurts still too tender to escape our heart. May, for the sake of love, keep our hearts and our minds and our arms open. And if you have any joys and concerns that were too tender to tell, you're welcome to share them with me or with Reverend Greg. Thank you. And we'll have a brief time of sound checking and so forth before the service itself starts at 10:30.
Good morning. My name is the Reverend Greg Ward, and along with the Reverend Barbara Myers and the Reverend Chris Schreiner, we join you from Mission Peak Unitarian Universalist Congregation, where we acknowledge the history of the Mohawk Ohlone tribe on this land. Thank you for joining us this morning as we renew our commitment to racial justice work within Unitarian Universalism.
Welcome. I'm the Reverend Morgan McLean, and along with Reverend Beth Banks, we join you from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Davis, where we acknowledge the history of the Patwin people on this land. You are welcome here in the fullness of who you are and of who you are becoming.
Welcome. I'm Reverend Teresa Soto from the First Unitarian Church of Oakland, where we acknowledge the history of the Miwok and the Bay Ohlone people on this land. Today, we make this shared space sacred through the practice of listening deeply.
Welcome. I am Nina Kalmutis, and I serve as the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Sunnyvale, where we acknowledge the history of the Ohlone peoples on this land. You are welcome wherever you are on your journey, and we are grateful for your presence here with us today.
Welcome. I'm Reverend Dara Olant. This is Ocean Olant. We're from the Unitarian Universalists of Petaluma, where we acknowledge the history of the coastal Miwok peoples on this land. Today, may we all answer the invitation to continued learning and reflection.
Good morning and welcome. I'm the Reverend Barbara Myers, Community Minister and a member of the Anti-Racism, Anti-Oppression Task Force at Mission Peak UU in Fremont. In this special service, with 5 congregations united today in our journeys to counter racism and oppression, we recognize we are a diverse array of congregations, each with its own gifts and challenges at different places on this anti-racism and anti-oppression journey. We see one another's efforts to engage authentically in this work. We see one another's challenges working in the margins or understanding the responsibilities of our privilege. We see our commitment to join together in this effort. We begin this sacred time by lighting a chalice, the symbol of our liberal faith. Our faith is built on the foundations of freedom, reason, and welcome, a faith that's sustained by acts of kindness and justice, a faith that envisions a world flourishing with equality for all people, a faith that demands living out our goodness, a faith that requires thoughtfulness, a faith of wholeness. This tiny flame is the symbol of the spark of this within all of us and with us working together. I've adapted the words of the Reverend Deborah Falk. Come, let us worship together.
We've got to give a little love, have a little hope, make this world a little better. Try a little more, harder than before, just do it, we can do it together. Oh, we can really make it better. Oh, la, 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 only if we try. Oh, we can really make it better. Oh, la, 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 only if we try. Living in this crazy world, so caught up in the confusion, nothing is making sense for me and you. Maybe we can find a way, there's got to be solution. how to make a brighter day. What do? We've got to give a little love, have a little hope, make this world a little better. Try a little more, harder than before, just do it, we can do it together. Oh, we can really make it better. Oh, la la la, only if we try. Oh, we can really make it better. Oh, la la la, only if we try. Only if we try. Only if we try.
Good morning. I am the Director of Religious Exploration at both the UU Fellowship of Sunnyvale and the UU Fellowship of Los Gatos. I'm humbled to be a part of this important service on the 8th principle. The book I would like to share with all ages this morning is titled Something Happened in Our Town, a child's story about racial injustice. It was recommended to me by my assistant teacher, Leah Simmons. This book explores the responses of two neighboring families, one black and one white, when a black man in their town is shot by a police officer. The younger children in both families have questions. Let's read to find out what they learn about racial injustice and how they react when a new kid shows up at school. Something Happened in Our Town, a child's story about racial injustice by Marianne Solano, Marietta Collins, and Ann Hazard, illustrated by Jennifer Zavoyne. Something had happened in our town. The news was on the TV, the radio, and the internet. The grown-ups didn't think the kids knew about it, but the kids in Ms. Garcia's class heard some older kids talking about it, and they had questions. After school, Emma asked her mother, "Why did the police shoot that man?" "It was a mistake," said her mother. "I feel sad for the man and his family." "Yes, the police thought he had a gun," said her father. "It wasn't a mistake," said her sister Liz. "The cops shot him because he was black." Emma was confused. "He is brown, not black," she said. "Some black people have dark brown skin and some have light brown skin," Emma's father explained. "Black usually means African American. Most of their ancestors were brought here from Africa as slaves." "I know what a slave is," said Emma. "That's when you have to do whatever the other person says." Yes, slaves had to do whatever white people told them to do. Even after slavery ended, white people didn't let black people live where they wanted, go to school with white people, or vote. Who are white people? White people came here from places in Europe, Russia, or other countries. We are white, even though our skin is light tan. "Did our family do those bad things a long time ago?" asked Emma. "Yes," answered her mother. "Back then, many white people thought that they were better than black people, even though it wasn't true." Liz added, "Some white people still think most black men and boys are dangerous, even though they're not." "Was the man that got shot dangerous?" asked Emma. "No," her mother said. "Shooting him was a mistake. It was a mistake that is part of a pattern." "Like the pattern on my blanket?" Emma asked. "Yes, but this pattern is being nice to white people and mean to black people. It's an unfair pattern." "Suppose you had a birthday party and invited everyone in your class except the black kids," her mother said. "How would the black kids feel?" "They would be sad," Emma said, "or mad. And you would be missing out because you never know who's going to be your best friend," said Liz. "And you can help others to be fair," said her mother. "Like telling Anna to stop teasing Ling about her name?" asked Emma. Her mother gave her a hug. "Yes, just like that." In another house, Josh asked his mother, Can police go to jail? Yes, said his mother. Why do you ask? That white policeman who shot the black man, said Josh. Will he go to jail? What he did was wrong, said his mother. But he won't go to jail, said his father. Why not? Asked Josh. Cops stick up for each other, said Josh's brother Malcolm, and they don't like black men. Josh was confused. Why not? Some police are black. You're right, said his mother. Uncle James is a police officer, and so is my friend Kenya. There are many cops, black and white, who make good choices, said his father, but we can't always count on them to do what's right. Malcolm added, I could get stopped by the police just because I'm black, even if I don't do anything wrong. That's not fair, Josh said. What if it was a white man in the car? Would the police have shot him? They probably wouldn't even have stopped the car, said his father. Sometimes white people are treated better than black people, said his mother, but it's not right. Everybody should be treated fairly. Josh's mother gave him a hug. We're proud of who we are. Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King Jr., and Nelson Mandela were strong and brave black leaders. They showed us that we can stand up for our rights and set good examples for others. They were treated unfairly, but helped others learn to be more fair. Some people haven't learned yet, said his father angrily. Why are you mad? Asked Josh. I'm mad because we're still treated poorly sometimes, but I can use my anger to make things better, said his father. Black people have a lot of power if we work together to make changes. I have power, Josh said, and I'm smart. His father smiled. You're right. His mother added, and you can change people's hearts by sticking up for someone who is not treated fairly. Like how Malcolm sticks up for me when the kids tease me about my glasses? Josh asked. He tells them to step off. Just like that, his parents said. The next day, a new kid joined Emma and Josh's class. His name was Omad, and he was from a country far away. Omad didn't know where to sit or what to do because it was his first day in school. He talked a little bit, but it was hard to understand him. He said he was learning English. After lunch, the class went outside to play soccer. Captains Daniel and Sophia picked kids to be on their teams. All of the kids were picked to be on a team, except Omad. Daniel said Omad probably didn't know how to play because he was new. Sophia said Omad might not be good at soccer. Josh remembered what his mother said about sticking up for people who are treated unfairly. Emma remembered what her mother had said about unfair patterns and birthday parties. All of a sudden, Omad wasn't alone. Emma and Josh were leading him to their team. We have enough kids on our team, Daniel said. We don't need him. But Josh was ready. Step off, he said. He's playing. Yeah, said Emma. We don't want to miss out. And just like that, Emma and Josh gained a new friend and started a better pattern in their school. Young Josh and Emma can inspire us to start better patterns too. May something happened in our town spark discussion in your homes and action in your neighborhoods. I appreciate this opportunity to share it with you.
Hi, my name is Alex Lee Job. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I identify as an Asian American Pacific Islander, and I'm a member of DRUM. Now, DRUM is the organization that we're requesting funds for this month. DRUM stands for Diverse, Revolutionary, Unitarian, Universalist, Multicultural Ministries. I am deeply grateful for its existence. It has given me a safe, brave space to land during this difficult pandemic. during which there have been 9,000 anti-Asian hate incidents, and the number is still growing. I am a member of the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus Steering Committee, which is under the umbrella of DRUM. It has provided me with a community of beloved siblings that nourish and challenge me. Thank you so much.
I'm Dennis Rowcliffe, a longtime member of the Journey Towards Wholeness anti-racism team at First Unitarian Church of Oakland. In the Oakland Church, we are planning for a congregational vote on the 8th principle in mid-December. Some discussions have already happened. A few more are planned in the coming weeks. We feel that while voting to adopt the new principle is important, what matters most is for the Church to identify and adopt ways of conducting ourselves and our community that will reflect and embody the principle's stated intentions. Some in the Oakland congregation have shown full support of the new principle, but others have expressed doubts about it. I've heard specific concerns on a few issues, including these two. One, noting that the style and phrasing of the current 8th principle statement are quite unlike those of the existing 7 principles. And 2, expressing doubt that the new principle is needed, given that some of the original 7 principles already presume an anti-racism, anti-oppression stance. So I want to briefly address both of those concerns. As to the wording, yes, it needs revising to make it more concise and consistent with the other principles. We've heard from Pollack-Johnson, who originated the 8th principle, that when support for the principle is broad enough to motivate the UUA leadership to adopt it, they will go through a process of rewriting and restating it to make it read more like the others. And as to why it's needed on the association level because the UUA has been unreliable in its hiring and promotion practices about making the church more diverse and multicultural. And in my home church, I know we've been slow to make ourselves a more welcoming and supportive congregation towards people of color. Accountability is the key concept identified in the 8th principle, and the clear intent of it is to make spoken intentions and promises meaningful. Undoing the sense of entitlement and sharing the inherited privileges we white people have in this society requires work, an attentiveness practice, and time, just as it takes steady effort to undo any long-held habit. The change process doesn't have to feel bad, and white people don't have to feel badly about ourselves to do this work. We're aiming to reach a state of mutual liberation. Let's get on the right path to having a cooperative society that can get the hard work done. Please join me and many others in supporting adoption of the 8th principle. Thank you.
I invite you now into an experience of prayerful reflection. I invite you to take an opportunity to connect more deeply with your own breath, your own body, your own being. Spirit of love, spirit of hope, holy, sacred source, deepest mystery, known by so many names. We come together this day from so many different places, so many different life experiences, so many different identities, so many different ways of being and knowing this world. Help us to be gathered in. Help us to acknowledge the multiplicities, the pluralism that lies within and the pluralism that is among us as a gathered community and as Unitarian Universalists. Help us also be called into a shared sense of purpose. Spirit of love, help us to welcome in and connect deeply with our own sense of humanity, allowing us to connect with our own experiences and allowing us to be fully present with the humanity and the experiences of others. Help us to listen and hear. Help us to learn and to unlearn. Allow us to be present with the full spectrum of emotions, ours and others. Soften us with a sense of humility. Hearten us with a sense of compassion. Welcome us to be available for the truth-telling. Help us to be available to participate in conversations in ways that stretch us. Help us to lean into discomfort. And help us to remember that we journey not alone. Spirit of love, spirit of human hope, possibility of liberation and transformation. Let us give thanks to those who have come before, who have been doing the work of justice seeking. Now let's give thanks to be part of this conversation here today. How can each one of us be part of this living tradition? Be part of healing the wounds of history and creating and renewing and transforming and shaping a Unitarian Universalism worthy of the future generations. Spirit of love, dwell with us and among us. Let us give thanks for the opportunity to be in worship and on this journey together this morning. Amen and blessed be.
Of such I dream, of such I dream, of such I dream, of such I dream, of such I dream. I dream of a world where no other man will scorn, boundless the earth, and peace is past the door. I dream of a world where all meadows sweet dreams play, where we no longer sense the soul, nor others rise on the day. Oh, world, I dream and I
Our reading is from a book by Ibram X. Kendi. It looks like this. It's called Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. A society of equal opportunity without a top 1% hoarding the wealth and power would actually benefit the vast majority of white people much more than racism does. It is not coincidental that slavery kept the vast majority of Southern whites poor. It is not coincidental that more white Americans thrived during the anti-racist movements from the 1930s to the early 1970s than ever before or since. It is not coincidental that the racist movements that followed in the late 20th century paralleled the stagnation or reduction of middle and low income whites' salaries and their skyrocketing costs of living. Anti-racists should stop connecting selfishness to racism and unselfishness to anti-racism. Altruism is wanted, but not required. Anti-racists do not have to be altruistic. Anti-racists do not have to be selfless. Anti-racists merely have to be intelligent, to have intelligent self-interest, and to stop consuming those racist ideas that have engendered so much unintelligent self-interest over the years. It is in the intelligent self-interest of middle and upper income Blacks to challenge the racism affecting the Black poor, knowing they will not be free of the racism that is slowing their socioeconomic rise until poor Blacks are free of racism. It is in the intelligent self-interest of Asians, Native Americans, and Latinx folks to challenge anti-Black racism, knowing they will not be free of racism until Black people are free of racism. It is in the intelligent self-interest of white Americans to challenge racism, knowing they will not be free of sexism, class bias, homophobia, and ethnocentrism until Black people are free of racism. The histories of anti-Asian, anti-Native, and anti-Latinx racist ideas, the histories and ethnocentric ideas all sound eerily similar to this history of racist ideas and feature some of the same defenders of bigotry in America. Supporting these prevailing bigotries is only in the intelligent self-interest of a tiny group of super rich Protestant, heterosexual, non-immigrant, white, Anglo-Saxon males. Those are the only people who need to be altruistic in order to be anti-racist. The rest of us merely need to do the intelligent thing for ourselves.
Now is the time we will calm our spirits with meditation or reflection. Take a smooth, easy breath and follow it in and out of your body. If that's not relaxing for you, perhaps expand your awareness to the chair beneath you, the room, the walls around you, the sky over you, the ground beneath your feet. Think of the people to whom you are connected, and think of the people who are connected to you. We will breathe together for about a minute, and then you'll hear a bell to signal closing. Let's begin. May we each and all, may the world be well.
That was beautiful. I'd like to thank all of those responsible for asking me to be here with you this morning, and to Mission Peak and other congregations who have helped put this service together. To everyone listening, I extend a warm welcome. My name is Bruce Pollack-Johnson. My pronouns are he and him. My home in Philadelphia sits on the unceded land of the Lenni Lenape Nation. I am a cisgender, straight, mentally and mostly physically able-bodied, tall, thin, older, educated, middle-class, European American man who has been racialized as white by our society. Virtually all of these identities give me more privilege and access to power than those with marginalized identities that do not yet have the same access to that power and privilege. I've tried to leverage my power and privilege to dismantle and redesign the systemic structures that have created these inequalities of resources, opportunities, and power. For example, my partner Linda and I decided to hyphenate our last names when we got married, symbolizing the connection of two equal individuals. And we gave our kids the last name of Paulson, Paul from her family name Pollack, and son from my family name Johnson, using the genetic metaphor of each parent contributing to who their children are, to encourage systems that are non-sexist and sustainable. Unitarian Universalism is a spiritual movement with incredible power and appeal to a wide variety of human beings. Our centering of the worth and dignity of every person and of justice, liberating freedom, and peace through the power of universal love is inspiring and exciting. It has the potential to help build the world we dream of. My remarks here today will focus on racial justice, especially with regard to African Americans. As Ibram X. Kendi said in the reading, this is the most virulent oppression in our society today and serves as a prototype for oppressions of other types. All of these oppressions are important, as are their intersectional children, and the eighth principle that I speak of today involves a commitment to dismantle all of them. There's not time today to do all of them justice, so I will focus on the one that is most critical for US society and UUism right now: the social construction of race, which has no biological basis. Since the 1960s, UUs of all colors have worked as allies and accomplices with people of color struggling against the forces of racism in the USA. And many people of color have joined our congregations. Unfortunately, a good number of people of color have also left our congregations. Why is that? There have been two events during this time that have been significant factors, and they are the two biggest crises over the entire history of the UUA. One occurred in the late 1960s, when the General Assembly pledged $250,000 per year for 4 years to fund self-improvement projects in communities of color under the control of people of color, a group called the Black Affairs Council. Unfortunately, the association, soon after that vote, realized that it had a major financial crisis. It made the first payment, but had to renege on the others. I call this our Black empowerment betrayal. It was followed largely by silence in the area of racial justice for 2 decades. The second crisis occurred just 4 years ago, when the president of the UUA had to resign because of systemic racism related to hiring and promotion decisions. I like to say that we've had 2 strikes against us in the area of racial justice. There are other reasons that people of color have visited and even become members of UU congregations, but then left. Probably the biggest is that Unitarianism and Universalism, as we know them, developed at the same time as the colonization of the Americas and the creation of the United States. So the racism of colonization and enslavement were part of the ether of the time and were baked into both religious branches. Culturally, we developed with the assumptions and habits of Europeans, and we Americans were largely responsible for the creation of the concept of whiteness, white superiority and white supremacy, a creation of planters and elites to drive a wedge between the working people of European and African descent and keep them from working together against the elites in a strategy often called divide and conquer. This has meant that many of our practices, including our music and the readings we select, for most of our history, were European in origin, largely emphasizing classical music and writings of white men. By our presence in this country, we have been a part of the structural racism of our society, such as the New Deal, which brought great benefits, including Social Security, retirement benefits, and home ownership for white families, but very little for families of color, since it excluded categories of employment which were the ones mostly occupied by Black and brown people, and did not support mortgages in Black neighborhoods. This was also true of the GI Bill, which helped white GIs finance a college education and home ownership, but did not get implemented for black GIs in the South and other areas because it was administered by the states. Our systems of taxing income, wealth, inheritance, and of funding schools and healthcare have also contributed to economic and social inequalities. Many white people are not aware of the privileges they have as a result of these systems, or of how our UU practices, which feel normal to them, might not feel comfortable or inviting to people of color and other marginalized groups. I like to use a metaphor to better understand this phenomenon. Suppose you were invited to a dinner, and as everyone sat down to their assigned seats, you saw the nice dinner set out for each person, including, let's say, shrimp and chocolate-dipped strawberries. Suddenly, someone walks in and starts taking individual shrimp and strawberries from the people of color at the table and gives them to the European Americans. Surely, you would immediately speak up and stop this blatant unfairness and racism. But now imagine the second scenario. The situation is the same, but this time the redistribution has occurred before everyone sat down. Would you notice? Would you say or do anything? Those of us who are white are faced with this second scenario constantly in our current world. The murder of George Floyd was blatant and got us to immediately protest. But there are a lot of other racial disparities that are much harder to notice and to do something about. We need to do the work to become aware of those disparities and work to remove them. At this point, many people ask, but what about white guilt? My answer is simple. Guilt is awareness without action. The cure is action, even if it's just small steps at first. In the 1990s, in response to the beating of Rodney King and the violent uprising that resulted from the acquittal of the police who beat him, UUs passed exemplary resolutions to become a multicultural, anti-racist, anti-oppressive association. The Jubilee anti-racism training workshops were created, and the Journey Toward Wholeness program was implemented, including critical assessment of our meetings and activities from an anti-racist and anti-oppression perspective. We made great progress in racial justice at this time. In the early 2000s, support for Jubilee and the Journey Toward Wholeness waned, and they were replaced with a weaker version of multiculturalism. Our progress on racial justice slowed significantly. In 2013, Pollack-Johnson, an African-American longtime worker for racial and social justice in the UUA, she and I were co-facilitating a multi-congregational post-Jubilee group that had decided to continue meeting monthly to support each other in anti-racism work in their congregations. One day, Paula and I were in a car, and Paula was describing how, in her position as a consultant to many UU congregations, she had noticed a pattern. She said she observed two main types of UU congregations. One, they tended to be either a Seven Principles congregation or a Beloved Community congregation. The Beloved Community congregations were very aware of systemic racism and other oppressions and were doing good work to dismantle them. In the Seven Principles congregations, she observed that many people felt they were living by the Seven Principles, but were basically oblivious to systemic racism and other oppressions. She said, maybe what we need is another principle. Now, I'm the kind of person that when faced with a challenge, will not sleep until I've taken a crack at solving it. So I stayed up late that night, crafting a new principle based on our conversation. I showed it to Paula, we worked on it together, and we brought it to our post Jubilee Group for further vetting and improvement. The result was the 8th principle you saw on the screen before the surface today. It reads, "We affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by building a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions." My congregation, which was then called the UU Church of the Restoration, but recently renamed ourselves UUs of Mount Airy in Philadelphia, added the language of the 8th principle to our congregational covenant that same year. We were not ready to adopt it as a principle yet, largely because of the issue of singling out racism as opposed to patriarchy or economic class, since economics led to the creation of whiteness and racism. We started a weekly Black Lives Matter vigil in 2014 that continues to this day after the Ferguson uprising, including half an hour of sharing racial justice information and observations. By the time the crisis of the president of the UUA resigning in 2017, there was no question. We adopted the 8th principle overwhelmingly, the first congregation to do so, and we recommended it for the UUA as well. That summer, Paula and I introduced the 8th principle as a responsive resolution to the General Assembly, and it also passed overwhelmingly. That led to the UUA Article 2 Commission, which is now considering the 8th principle and a possible rewrite of all the principle's purposes and sources. We introduced and passed another responsive resolution this year to say that the ideas of the 8th principle should be in the principles as opposed to the sources or purposes, and it again passed overwhelmingly. We believe that the principles are what UUs remember and pay attention to, and so are where these important commitments need to be located. The Article 2 Commission is supposed to make a proposal by early 2023, which will then get voted on at GA that summer. If it passes, another vote the next year would make it official. The work of anti-racism is spiritual work. To me, spirituality is about connectedness. In ourselves, it is connectedness to our true selves, to the still small voice within us, and our integrity. In the wider world, it involves connectedness with other people and beings, with nature and our planet and the universe, and the development of harmony at all levels. Racism divides one group of people from another and kills the souls of those involved in the oppression. Anti-racism and anti-oppression work is thus a journey toward wholeness, wholeness within ourselves and in our wider society. As Ibram Kendi said in the reading, anti-racism progress is in the intelligent self-interest of all people. Racism keeps people from finding or continuing personal relationships that might have been deeply meaningful and beautiful. I've heard stories of people who had cross-racial friendships at school that were then quashed by racist parents when they realized the race of the friend. Racism also deprives society and all of us of brilliant and creative discoveries and artistic works that might have been possible without racist systems that created inequalities of resources and education. We should all be aware that even though we can be proud of our racial justice work in the 1960s, there have been aspects of our history that we should not be so proud of. Thomas Jefferson, whom we proudly claimed as a UU for a long time, wrote the Declaration of Independence, which included beautiful anti-racist ideas, but he was also an enslaver who did not believe that blacks were equal to whites, although he did think that perhaps Native Americans were. He talked about being in support of slavery ending, but never freed any of those he enslaved, even at his death, except Sally Hemings, with whom he had several children. A good number of Unitarians and Universalists were abolitionists, but many also were not, and even the abolitionists largely did not believe in the equality of blacks and whites. Many prominent Unitarian scientists were involved in the eugenics movement, which was all about purifying the human race and led to programs of forced sterilization of blacks and other people of color even into the 1970s. It also led to Nazi Germany's Holocaust and apartheid in South Africa. UU seminaries for centuries did not encourage people of color to enroll, and even when they did and became ministers, the denominations did not support their serving as settled ministers for a long time. So you see, we have a lot of racism in our history that needs to be acknowledged, apologized for, dismantled, and repaired. UUs are great at talking and writing, and that can be a part of the work. But even more important is action to dismantle racism and other oppressions. That means actions to remove or correct systems, policies, procedures, and practices that have created inequalities based on race and other identities. This word action is essential in the eighth principle. Because of the baked-in white supremacy culture within UUism, we also have to be careful about white savior kinds of action. Those of us from European cultures like to take charge and solve problems. If that is done without consultation with those who have been oppressed, it is itself racist. That is why the concept of accountability is also part of the eighth principle. One aspect of accountability is developing relationships with communities of color or other oppressed groups, and then leveraging the power and privilege some of us may have in our society to support and assist them in their efforts to liberate themselves. That is where the concepts of being allies or accomplices comes in. This can also mean having those communities hold us accountable to do what we say we will do and give us feedback when we fall short. Accountability also means holding ourselves accountable to our commitments. Adopting the eighth principle is a commitment to racial and social justice. It provides what was missing in the 1990s that let us slip away from our anti-oppression work. As a side comment, none of the existing 7 principles mention the word love. The eighth principle fills that gap and puts it in the context of the beloved community that Martin Luther King Jr. spoke about so passionately as our vision of the future that we are working towards. The beloved community is the vision of a community in right relation with itself, where all members are treated with equal respect and love, and are all nurturing the thriving of every individual. The Trans Inclusion Workshop of the Transforming Hearts Collective gives an excellent introduction to the ideas of the beloved community and radical hospitality. I recommend it very highly to any congregation that's interested in the eighth principle. In the 20th century, UUism was largely associated with individual freedom of conscience. We can think of this perhaps as our teenage development stage, as we evolve to a theology that involves collective liberation for entire communities. It feels like we are growing up, maturing. Like all processes of development, there are likely to be growing pains, but the rewards have incredible potential. As of right now, over 120 congregations and UU organizations have adopted the eighth principle as individual groups out of roughly 1,000 congregations. About a year ago, that number was only 29, so the movement is gaining momentum. This has been a grassroots movement from the beginning, with no formal support from the UUA. For well over a year now, we have held monthly Zoom gatherings of what we call the Eighth Principle Learning Community, to hear people talk about issues related to the Eighth Principle, to share experiences and resources, and to ask questions and get help in designing a process for adopting the Eighth Principle and then living by it. In recent months, most of these gatherings have involved 200 or 300 people each time. For those of you whose congregations have not yet adopted the Eighth Principle, I encourage you to do what you need to do to raise consciousness and develop a plan for adopting it. For those who have adopted it, I encourage you to roll up your sleeves and continue the work. Can you still hear me? I just want to make sure I'm coming through okay. Thank you. After the UUA crisis of 2017, when our president resigned, we responded to in a much more productive way than we did to the Black empowerment betrayal by appointing 3 UUs of color as co-presidents, appointing a diverse moderator team, and creating the Commission on Institutional Change to study the systemic and institutional racism and other oppression within the UUA and make recommendations about how to dismantle those structures. The Commission released its report called Widening the Circle of Concern last year. For congregations and groups that have adopted the Eighth Principle, studying this report and seeing how it applies to your group is a great starting point for the work that needs to be done. Let's not repeat our failures to follow up on the good work we did in the 1960s and the 1990s. We have 2 strikes against us. We have been thrown a nice pitch at this moment in history. Let's make sure we hit this one out of the park. The potential for our liberatory faith movement is limited only by our imagination and creativity. May it be so. Ashe. Amen. Now I'd like to sing a song by Charlie King that is about tearing down the walls of racism, oppressions, as well as the walls between people. It has a chorus that repeats, and if you know it or if you get the idea, please join in for those choruses. There is a wall, and it's the tallest wall of all. They named a street for it, where numbers rule and eyes go blank, a wall of gold. They buy the future with the past, they call it work. Seems more like money in the bank. And way down at the foot of that wall, where the guards can barely see her at all, a woman is standing, not asking, not demanding. A poor woman is standing with a hammer in her hand. Don't you want a piece of that wall when it comes down? Don't you want to live to see it fall when it comes round? When that wall is gone, no matter which side you were on, can you say you took a piece of that wall down? Don't you want a piece of that wall? There is a wall, and it's the meanest wall of all, stretched from my doorstep straight back to 1492. It hides the settlements, it hides the ovens, the reservations, pink triangles, passbooks, shackles, and tattoos. And way down at the foot of that wall, where the guards can barely see him at all, an old man is standing, not asking, not demanding. An old black man is standing with a hammer in his hand. Sing along. Don't you want a piece of that wall when it comes down? Don't you want to live to see it fall when it comes round? When that wall is gone, no matter which side you are on, could you say you took a piece of that wall down? Don't you want a piece of that wall? There is a wall, and it's the oldest wall of all, a wall of fear. Holds danger out, desire in, a wall that bristles each time the warden brings back tales. Inside we're starving. We make the bricks to build the cells, to bury love, to bar the door, to ban the stranger. And way down at the foot of that wall, where the guards can barely see at all, a stranger is standing, not asking, not demanding. A stranger is standing with a hammer for your hand. Don't you want a piece of that wall when it comes down? Don't you want to live to see it fall when it comes round? When that wall is gone, no matter which side you were on, will you say you took a piece of that wall? Don't you want a piece of that wall? Yeah.
We extinguish our chalice, but not the spark of commitment that we take with us together to our individual congregations, willing us to thoughtfully and actively create an environment where a diverse, multicultural, dynamic community can grow ever stronger, where all experience an invitation to spiritual wholeness.
May we all continue our work to take down pieces of the walls of racism, transphobia, sexism, classism, homophobia, ableism, and other oppressions in ourselves, in our congregations, in our society, and in the world. Blessed be.
Thank you, everyone, for such a wonderful service. This is Eric Alm, your Zoom worship host here at Mission Peak UU Congregation in Fremont. I would like to thank again all of our partner congregations in Oakland and Petaluma and others for joining us today and contributing to this special service. I especially want to thank Reverend Bruce for joining us all the way from Italy. I know it's starting to get late in Central Europe, 9 hours ahead. But before you go, Bruce, I'd like to ask you if you're still available for about 10 or 15 minutes to take any questions from our congregations. Oh, that's great. Okay, in that case,
Definitely.
I'd like anyone who has a question they want to ask, please put it in the chat and identify which congregation you're from. If you're here at Cole Hall in Mission Peak, ask Graham to type in your question. That ought to work okay. So, hello again, Bruce. We actually already have a question, and that is from Martha at UUP in Petaluma. Can others attend the 8th principal meetings?
Yes, I'll put in the chat the way to get on the list of notifications is to email Pollack-Johnson, who we mentioned. Her email is pcjones@gmail.com. And you should get a response back from her saying you've been added to the list. If you know someone who is already attending, they can forward you the link one time, but we'd like to know to get a measure of how many people are participating. So if you know that you would like to in future ones, just email Paula and you can be added to the list. Thanks.
Great. And we also have Steve from UCD in Davis, wondering if given we have 5 or more congregations in this service, will the offering be 100% donated to the drum? I can't personally answer that question, so I believe that'll be a discussion that the ministers will have. But I'm not sure if you have any input on that, Bruce.
So, could you repeat the question? Where the contribution goes?
Yes, for today's
I haven't had anything to do with that. I guess Reverend Greg and the other ministers have worked that out. I don't know the details.
Okay.
I see a hand by Kay Rivers.
Okay. Kay, you ought to be able to unmute.
So, hi, I'm from the Petaluma Church, and I just wanted to make the request that when you refer to Sally Hemings in your presentation, that you please don't use the phrasing of had children with her, because he did have the opportunity to free her and decided not to, and continued to rape her and have children by her. She had no agency or consent. That I would really prefer you not phrase it that way, because it really makes it sound like she had some kind of choice, and she absolutely did not.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
And we have a question from Greg and Emily Stoper. I'm of two minds about the words "and other oppressions" in the draft 8th principle. On one hand, racism is such a towering problem, but it seems wrong to just shuffle off classism, sexism, homophobia, etc. How can we deal with this?
I think part of the answer is, it comes from the Kendi book, really, that that racism is most virulent in our society and in our association as well, that it needs to be addressed separately, and it would clearly be wonderful to be able to mention everything else as well. But as others have noticed, the principle is already long compared to the other principles, and that's where we ended up. We'll see where the Article 2 Commission ends up on that question, but the important thing is that all of them be there as part of it.
Great, and we have the question from Stephen Longfield here at Mission Peak. What concrete changes do you think we should be making in our congregations in support of the principles behind the 8th principle?
I'll just say one thing that may or may not be related to that specific question, but it's not necessarily a situation where the proof of success is to have a diverse congregation. That is clearly a desirable thing. But if a church is in an area where there are not a lot of people of color or folks from other marginalized groups, that the main goal is to educate ourselves, to be knowledgeable about those the issues related to systemic oppressions, and to have our congregation such that if someone, a Black person or someone from another group came, they would feel comfortable and would be interested in staying. The circumstances of individual congregations may not make a large number of those possible, but that's one factor. In terms of specific things, the Beloved Conversations program, a lot of churches have done that. That's more moving towards the level of understanding needed. But in terms of actual changes, you can look in your, for instance, decision-making structures, where you have a very European system of making decisions with majority rule. There are other systems such as modified consensus and sociocracy that the UUA has been experimenting with that could be considered, especially for smaller congregations. Looking at just the use of Robert's rules, especially at a congregational level, may be more white than is necessary, and you may be able to find other ways to make good decisions as a group that would be less exclusive. People, there tends to be white males who understand the depths of Robert's rules and can then exploit the process for getting results that results in lack of inclusion and other kinds of problems. So just in general, looking at policies and procedures, an obvious thing would be looking at, music and readings and making sure that you have representation from lots of different voices that need to be heard as a starting point. There's plenty of others, I guess, but maybe we could see if there's another question. I have to leave for our board meeting in about 10 minutes, so let's see if we can get a couple of other questions.
Okay, that's great. So this from the Oakland congregation. Hi, Bruce. I'm Reverend Inan, lead minister at the Oakland congregation. The question I would love to examine as many facets of as possible is simply how adoption of the principle will do anything to improve our practice.
I agree that adoption by itself is nothing. If a congregation just took a vote today with no preparation, that's not really meaningful. The the reason I was interested in proposing it officially was to encourage the kinds of conversations that we want to be having about understanding what systemic racism and other oppressions look like, understanding how they work and what we can do about them. And just those conversations that from the beginning, my measure of success was how many people has this encouraged to talk about these issues. And it's clearly, for me, exceeded my hopes at the original time when I would go to events with a table about the eighth principle and maybe one or two people would stop by and say hello, but it's gotten to a point where, it's very much in people's consciousness, and that's the whole point. The other point is just making a commitment. It's not just a vote, it's a commitment. It's, on the level of making a commitment in a relationship, that we are saying that this is important to us as a group, whether it's an individual congregation or a whole association. My goal, frankly, is to have every individual congregation adopt the eighth principle before it even comes to a vote at General Assembly, because then it will really have been meaningful in all those individual congregations.
Thank you, Bruce. I wanted to ask Kay if you have another question. Your hand is still raised. Nope. Okay, now it's down. So I have a question for you, Bruce. In working with you before this service, understand you have a history of performing that particular song. It was wonderful, by the way, that you shared with us at the end. Could you tell us a little bit about the history behind that song? And also, where did you get that guitar?
I got it from, so I'm in Italy on sabbatical, helping to design a course for Villanova University called the University Racial Justice course. That's going to be required of all undergraduates in a couple of years. While I was here, I took a course, 6-week course on Italian language and culture, just for personal enrichment. And one of the teachers there, his wife used to play the guitar. I didn't have enough room in my luggage to bring a guitar with me, so I asked around and I was able to get it from Paola Stoppa.
Very good. Thank you very much. So Bruce, thank you again for your, just a moment, let me check the chat here. So Steve with UUCD says, sharing my own personal journey with the concept of white supremacy in the UU world. At first, the term really bothered me, as I consider us much better than that. We don't wear white hoods and burn crosses. I've now come to simply look at the structures in our society which are designed and continue to keep white people at the top or supreme, and it takes worse for us to change. That's an excellent message.
Yeah, that's a good point that I think probably at this point, there's a little less of that kind of reaction, but the idea of white supremacy culture is much more than just Klansmen and obvious white supremacists. It's just the way things are structured that make the assumption that white is better and should be controlling things.
Well, thanks again, Bruce, for your time and engagement in this eighth principle movement. We'll let you get to your board meeting. So have a good night and have a pleasant evening. For
Thank
everyone
you.
else.
I'll just mention there, I see Joanne has a hand, but I was going to put on the Going Deeper slide that other things that are great for development are the Jubilee 3 anti-racism training that happens from a Friday evening till a late afternoon on a Sunday, gets into the depths of systemic racism And it's probably the most transformative program that any of the UUA over the decades. It has really made a difference. If you can get a group of people from your congregation to do it together, that's even better. Paula coordinates those also, so the same email that somebody just ran by in the chat again is relevant for that one. She's probably the best. There is a website, but it's not kept up to date perfectly. And I mentioned the Transforming Hearts Collective's Trans Inclusion Workshop as another great development tool for your congregation, as well as Beloved Conversations that I know a lot of people have done, and then just general book discussions and other things that get people thinking about these kinds of issues.
Great. Well, thank you very much for getting that in, Bruce. Really appreciate it. So again, have a very good night and pleasant evening. And for everyone else here on the service, have a good rest of your day.